Hello, I am here to tell you that this will be a long video. So please grab snacks, grab a cup of tea, coffee, whatever you like, and buckle up. If you want to put this as like white noise in the background, or if you want to intently, wind down the day and let's just chat about books and the best books that I read last year, please do so. Please enjoy. And now, onto the rest of the video. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Shane. Today we're gonna talk about the best books of 2022. And today, I'm gonna divide this into two parts, the non-fiction one and the fiction part. Okay, so we're gonna start with the honorable mentions. So the honorable mentions are apparently two fiction books that I did enjoy last year. So that's The Cheat Sheet by Sarah Adams and Better Than the Movies by Lynn Painter. And these books are both clean romance, so basically wholesome, super wholesome. It's just such a portrayal of fluff and heart-fluttering stuff that it's a good escapism if you want something that's light, that's comfy, that's happy, that's also healthy to read. The story is not far-fetched. It's not exactly something that just happens in books. So that's why there's also realistic themes in here. And that's what I loved about it. But I love that these books plant a healthier side of Okay, so let's go to the nonfiction part first. There are 4 books in here, and I'm gonna start with the top 4 in the nonfiction era or nonfiction category era. So the fourth one is When Your Best Isn't Enough. This is by Dr. Kevin Lehman, if I'm not mistaken. This is therapy in a book, basically. It's so comforting, it's so assuring, but it doesn't feed you lies. It basically first tackles the root of why you feel like you're not enough. And it tackles so much of childhood trauma and how you can heal from that and how you can also not pass that onto your kids. And it's so freeing to read. And it basically also makes you question so many things about your life. And if aspects of your life are habitual already, or there's already a pattern wherein it's rooted in trying to please people, trying to perform for people, trying to do things or be someone that you know will give praise for you, will make you feel like you're enough. And yeah, there's so much thought-provoking things in this book that's why I loved it. Really try to absorb the book as much as you can. So recommend. So recommend. Top 3 is Soul Keeping by Richard Blackaby. And wow, this book is also therapy in a book. As you can see, I went through a lot last year. But no, it's for basically trying to keep your soul, trying to protect your soul. And in this world, there's so many things that we try to protect except our soul, and we don't realize how important trying to keep our souls, and basically how it also translates to how we try to protect our peace, how we try to protect our sanity. Those things are not normally our priorities in life. Just practicing also the art of stepping back, of pausing, of resting, of, not getting so caught up in the rat race because you're not a rat. That's what I loved about this, because I read this when I was reviewing for the board exams. At that time, you can get so caught up with the rush, the competition, the pressure of wanting to pass, of also maybe topping the boards. And it's so good because it came at such a timely moment in my life wherein, the last thing that anyone in my position would do is prioritize my soul, protect my soul. Because at that time, you'd probably throw anything just to pass. And knowing how technically the passing rate for the boards is not exactly the highest, that would put so much pressure and so much anxiety on you that you'd hustle hard, you'd do everything, study 24/7 or whatever, so that you could pass and probably top or whatever, achieve the dreams that you have for yourself. And what I loved about this book is that it kept me grounded, basically reminded me of what matters most. That at that time, reviewing for the boards, it's just a season and it's not worth throwing your soul at. Basically, it made me realize that even though, yes, that, I needed to study, I needed to work hard, I needed to put effort in those things, that it does not fair compared to my soul. It does not fair compared to protecting and taking care of my soul, taking care of my relationship with God. Because you know what? You're so limited. And you have to listen to your body when it's telling you that it's tired, when it's telling you to honor the boundaries that you've set. And there's so much honor when you read this. There's so much also respect and protection and peace and freedom. It's such a good book. So yes, now moving on. There was a point of contention wherein I was thinking that this was probably the best book that I read last year in the nonfiction category, but it ended up being number 2 because there's a better one. Okay, so let's first tackle this one. This is Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. This there's a lot of medical aspects in this book, and while it's not a technical book. You can actually read it if you don't know anything about medicine, if you don't know anything about health. It's so accessible. I love how it emphasized that, you know what, as doctors, we can only do so much. And not necessarily the surgery or the procedure that entails the most amount of money and the most amount of sacrifices, those are not necessarily or automatically the right choices for the patient. As we protect the quality of our patients' lives, that does not entail going to surgery, that does not entail going to chemo, not necessarily. There's so much also respect for the autonomy of the patient. There's also a reason that it explains or it shows that it's important to work with the patient and their family when it comes to their therapy and their treatment. And it also basically brings up or surfaces the issues with medical institutions, with how we lack in equipment, how we also lack in build rapport and build relationship and build a team with the patient. We focus too much on their feelings that we forget about the things that they have to know. Because at some point, they do have to know, and that's their life. And at some point, you have to let them decide. Not just at some point, in everything, you have to let them decide. In this book, you battle with the struggle of respecting the patient's opinions and respecting the patient's choices about their lives, and also at the same time wanting the best for them. I love this book because there are so much stories in this book that basically tells that you can actually reach a point of balance with the patient and their family, and actually getting them or letting them or helping them achieve the goals that they have for their health and for their life. So I love this. I love this book. It was a heavy book. It's not something that you can read in one sitting and absorb in one sitting. I did remember telling myself that I should probably reread this every 2 years. I cannot reread this every year. I'd probably go crazy. So yes, and that's why it's a humbling book, because it makes you also come to terms that as a doctor, as a healthcare worker, you're limited. You're no God. You don't give life. You're not the author of creation or life. And you have to come to terms with that. That at some point, you do have your limits and you have to respect that. And that's the thing, because we have different gauges or different standards when it comes to qualifying our life as something that is still worth living, as something that still worth fighting, especially here in the Philippines. I think it's so important that we have to have the talk of mortality, because at some point we do die. And the fact that we distract ourselves from death because it's such a foreign concept and it's also such a scary concept that we try to steer clear from it. But that's the thing, eh. We're so close to death, we're so close to life and death, especially when you work in the healthcare field. It should be talked about, that it should be brought in. Because you can't keep running away, and what happens when they do die and they don't know what to do? So I think it's important to give them the space to actually think about those things, to bring that up, and to not be afraid. Well, not entirely be afraid, but as people, we have to talk to our elders. We have to come to terms and think about those things, so that when we do decide things about our life, things about our health, we know the gauge. We know when, up until when we can fight. There's also a level of self-respect there, when you actually do decide that this is where hanggang dito mo lang kaya. And there's so much I can say about this book. But I'll stop there for now. Okay, so now let's go to the top one. The best of the best. Okay, so the best book, nonfiction book that I read last year was Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortland. This is a Christian book and possibly one of the most life-changing books that I've read. And this one I have to read every year, definitely. What caught me with this book was that it said here that amongst the things that Jesus described himself when he went here on earth and he lived here was that the only two words, two adjectives that Jesus described himself with was that he is gentle and lowly. So I think that that just speaks a lot. That speaks a lot about who Jesus is, how loving he is, how meek he is, how humble he is in heart, how you actually understand more of Jesus's heart for the people, for you, for me. When I read this, when I understood that Jesus is gentle and lowly, and that he's not the mean God that we think he is. He's not the sassy God. What I loved about this book was that it made me realize that Jesus is love, that he's not, that he gets hurt probably more than I do when there's injustice. He gets hurt with probably more than I ever will when there's someone who treats his daughter or his son with so much contempt, so much injustice, so much unrighteousness that it hurts him so much. It hurts him deeply. And especially also the part where we sin. We think that we have to fix ourselves or somewhat make ourselves look presentable before we actually go to God. And it freed me so much because when you do sin, you feel a pang of guilt, but then you try to somewhat still fix that. Try to somewhat make yourself feel better before you actually go to God. But I loved in here that it said that I'm going to read a passage from the book. It says here, the minimum bar to be enfolded into the embrace of Jesus is simply open yourself up to him. That's it. It's all he needs. Indeed, it is the only thing he works with. Verse 28 of our passage in Matthew 11 tells us explicitly who qualifies for fellowship with Jesus. All who labor and are heavy laden. You don't need to unburden or collect yourself and then come to Jesus. Your very burden is what qualifies you to come. No payment is required. He says, I will give you rest. His rest is a gift, not a transaction. There's another thing that I loved so much about this one. Last year there was so much, I guess, argument about compassion and justice and empathy and all those things and how that translates to society and politics. I loved here, it says here that what we are saying is that yes, Christ got angry and still gets angry, for he is the perfect human who loves too much to remain indifferent. And this righteous anger reflects his heart, his tender compassion. But because his deepest heart is tender compassion, he is the quickest to get angry and feels anger most furiously, and all without a hint of sin tainting that anger. It says here, Warfield is saying that a morally perfect human such as Christ would be a contradiction if he didn't get angry. That's what we think, that, if Jesus got angry, then maybe he's not perfect. He also sins because we think for some reason that anger is a sin. Perhaps we feel to the degree we emphasize Christ's compassion, we neglect his anger. And to the degree we emphasize his anger, we neglect his compassion. But what we must see is that the two rise and fall together. A compassionless Christ could never have gotten angry at injustices all around him. The severity and human barbarity, even that flowing from religious elite. No, compassion and indignation rise together in his soul. It is the father who loves his daughter most, whose anger rises most fiercely if she is mistreated. And I love that. I love that so much because it explains so much of God's heart for us, God's heart and God's care and God's love, and how it runs so deep in him that he reacts like this towards us. These are just like two passages in the book, and that's why it's so good. The book is so good, and that's why it's the top one last year. I think it makes God's heart and God's love for you and God's justice and the things that God's character, basically, it makes it so accessible to people. It makes it so understandable. And the writing is also easily understandable and easily accessible. And that's why 10 out of 10. Okay, so now let's go to the part 2 of the best books of 2022 that I read. Let's start with Kiss the Sky and basically the Addicted Calloway Sisters series. This is by Krista and Becca Ritchie. So this follows 3 couples. This story, the Addicted series contains 5 books. This focuses on Lo and Lily and their addictions. That's why it's called Addicted. And basically, Lily is a sex addict and Lo is an alcohol addict. And it just tells the story of how they overcome that, how they come together, how they fight through those things, and how in the end they also just build their lives. It's such a hopeful story. It's such a hopeful book. I cried many times while reading the book, especially in Ricochet, if I'm not mistaken, and also in Thrive. For me personally, I can't not root for people when they're actually doing and making an effort to better themselves, to fight for their lives, fight for the people that they love. And I loved it. I loved every part of it. And after having been following them for like what, 15 years, 17 years, if I'm not mistaken, if you do read the 10 books, it's so hard to say goodbye. And you can't help but relish even even the parts that feel like they're dragging or they were redundant. So I loved it. I loved the series. And my most favorite book that I just sped through whilst reading it was Kiss the Sky. This focused on Connor and Rose Cobalt. So they're my favorite. They're my favorite academic rivals to lovers. They're basically the couple that's the responsible one, the leader couple, and yeah, they're so smart, so good looking, and yeah, I just love the personalities of the characters. Sometimes honestly, Connor was annoying, but sometimes you can't help but also be attracted to people that are confident. But there's a fine line between confidence and arrogance. But Connor Cobalt pulls it off, and that's why I love him. I love him, and he's basically like my biggest crush, my biggest fictional crush ever. I love this series because it felt so real. There were parts wherein the writing did not feel as accessible as I wanted it to. I love the character development. And I mean, it would have sucked if there were no character development after 9 books. I also just enjoyed the familial themes in this book. I loved the overcoming of the addictions and how also family and support groups and friends play into that. And that's why it makes you realize that you really can't do life alone. Loneliness is such a bust, and you think that if you have someone romantically with, that's fine, us against the world type of thing. But no, this book makes you realize that there's also so much more, that you do need friends, that you do need genuine friends, not just people who'd be with you for the fun stuff, but also people who'd be with you, who'd give you tough love, give you honesty, fight for you when you can't fight for yourself. And I loved also that they tackled the stigma around addiction in here, and also anxiety, and basically what the public view or being a public figure and what that does to your mental health. Yeah, it felt like it was an honor to spend 17 years to not spend, but to have seen their 17 years and to have seen them grow and build their futures and actually achieve the things that they want. And sometimes, there are revisions with your plans, with your future plans, and that's fine. You actually have to welcome those things. Another book that is in my best pile of 2022 is The Flatshare by Beth O'Leary. So, The Flatshare is about Tiffy and Leon, and basically they share a flat. Okay, so, but in this book, they don't meet after a while, and that's what makes them able to share a flat, because so basically the other person has to work at night and the other one works in the morning, so basically they don't have to meet ever with that arrangement, and that's the flat share. And they just exchange notes in the flat. Basically, first it began with just notes about the house, notes about living, and yeah, basically the flat. And it turned into something more friendly, then it turned into something romantic. So yeah, I love the progression of the story. I also love Leon was there to protect Tiffy, because there's actually in here, trigger warning, there's a lot of gaslighting in here. Lots and lots of gaslighting. And this is actually the book that made me realize this is what gaslighting looks like. First, it was so vague to me, but I just knew that it was some sort of manipulation, but I don't know how it manifested. But in this book, it made me see that this is what gaslighting is. It's a good book. Honestly, good does not even describe it. It's an underrated book. And it's a green flag book. It's one of the things that if I were to recommend a romance book, this is the book that I would recommend. I love this. I just love how it was also mental health friendly. I loved how Leon was, in retrospect, when you actually realize and take time to analyze that there is a healthy form of relationship, that, you don't have to settle, that there are actually guys like this who do respect you and will empower you and will not down you, will not be insecure about who you are, how powerful you are, or how incredibly talented and amazing you are. It's such a win. It's such a win book. Basically, in this book, there wasn't really some huge plot twist, but it's such a cozy, set the bar high kind of book that I can't help but gush about it. It's a book wherein it basically portrays what a healthy communication looks like. It's rare, it's underappreciated, it's understated, and I don't see much of this book being raved about online, which is so sad. I'm so happy that I read this and I did not let board season stop me from enjoying this book. So please check out this book. Just so much fluffiness and goodness and healthy, so much healthy relationship portrayal. So, okay, I'm gonna stop. Moving on, we have Beach Read and Book Lovers on the same level. I put this in the same level because when I read Book Lovers, it felt like it was Beach Read 2.0 for some reason. While Beach Read is more emotional and more dramatic in that sense, I think what made them so similar for me were the leads, were Gus and Charlie. I think I love Charlie more. In both books, I love the banter. I also love the secret pining of the guys. They're both enemies to lovers. But what I loved about this, especially in Book Lovers, was that there was so much acknowledgement of feelings. There was also just so much acknowledgement and assurance that it's fine to feel that way. It's fine to think that way. And I'll just be here. I'll just be here to listen to you. And because in so many times, I feel like there's this thing with guys that they feel like they need to fix things for women. But I love that in these books, it just portrayed that, you know what? I'm no Superman. I can't fix things for you, but I can be there for you. I can walk with you, and I can be your comfort, and I can be your safe haven, even if you go through those things. So, even when you go through those things. So, I would not say that they're the best book boyfriends ever. I feel like Charlie Lastra, though, is part of the top tier along with Connor Cobalt. Anyways, moving on to the best book that I have read from last year is Miss Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Wow. What a book. Okay, what a book. When I was reading this, the one word that I could describe this book was it was so premium. Like, that's how it felt reading this book. Again, there are those books that you can't help but gush over because it's such an honor to read them in your lifetime. It's such an honor that they were released and are available in your lifetime. This is one of those books, and this is basically about Evelyn Hugo and her life and her story and her stardom. There's so much glitz and glamour and how she navigates through life of publicity, life as an actress, life also as a woman, but also life as someone who is figuring out her identity, her sexual identity, her desires, and how she also just basically lives her life. I also just love the writing. Just loved it. I love the story. I love the pacing. I love how accessible it was. It wasn't so hard to read, but it was also very heavy. It was gorgeous. It was powerful. It was empowering to read, and but it was also gut wrenching. It was I also cried in this book. Not cry, just tears. Also, Evelyn Hugo is one of those characters that's morally gray. But then again, at some point I realized that maybe all people are. We make choices that we're not proud of, but there were choices or there are choices that we will make again, even if we turn back time. I cannot not love something about Hollywood and all the pop culture stuff. I'm always such a sucker for that. So 5 out of 5, maybe 6 out of 5. But really, it was the best fiction book that I read last year, and I will not regret saying that. So thank you for staying this long. If you even reached this point, I super appreciate it. And please feel free to share the best books that you read last year. I would appreciate it if there were more like fictional recommendations, but all nonfiction, fiction, whatever genre you feel like recommending, please do recommend. I will check them. I will read them. and I will read your comments. No assurance if I will read the book that you recommend, but I would like to still see them. Please feel free to share. Please feel free to involve your opinions in this conversation. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time. Bye bye.